Hi, I'm currently at my parents' home right now, which is why I'm in a different location. But I am filming this video for you nonetheless because I am very brave to be doing so with everybody like right outside my door. Today we're going to be doing an omegaverse triple feature where I'm going to be talking about you know how there was an omegaverse lawsuit, a while back. I'm going to talk about the lawsuit itself. I don't have any legal knowledge. However, what I do have is the free time to read both of the books involved, as well as one supplementary text, and I'm going to be talking about the issue of originality within Omegaverse fiction to talk about what these books actually seem to be about, because I have fun doing that. So let's get into our three books. So the first one we're going to be starting with is not a book at all. It is the originator of Omegaverse as we know it, the modern one. We can kind of draw this, direct line between this prompt on like this like CW real person fiction kink meme and what we see today. This is pretty obvious. Everybody knows this. However, I don't think everybody has read the 2010 fic I Ain't No Lady, But You'd Be the Tramp by Tedodius Sock, which was in fact the originator of it. So I kind of want to talk about what actually is going on in this original one, and then we'll move from there. So, in the original prompt that the OP was responding to, they paraphrase like this: in a world where men are either alpha males or bitches, we don't have megas yet actually, Jensen is a snotty prude who won't let just anyone have his sweet little ass. And then he meets alpha male Jared, sort of like a human lady in a tramp with dog like sex. I know, hell of a description, but we get into it with some lines that made me laugh. The first one that I just had this immediate visceral reaction to was this one where, quote, he'd head to Cali, where people accepted straight he bitches like him. Wow, like every line of this is just bristling with implications of what's going on in this like pack sex universe. I appreciate that. I read like original fiction because I also don't know who these guys are or what they look like. So to me, like these are that person's original characters. So possibly it was not original at all, and that actually all these tropes were just circulating. But like, first of all, the kind of guy who would say Callie. Second of all, he bitches. Second of all, third of all, straight he bitches. like there's just so much to unpack there, and obviously it's not the focus of this video, so we're not going to. So I'm going to read you some more lines from this. The only thing keeping Jensen from decking him, and damn the consequences, was the knowledge that he'd been banging this guy's girlfriend since the week they got together. There's a guy in the diner where he works who's trying to bully him. He winked at Sarah, the girl, unclear if she has like a gender, tucked under Debo's arm, and smirked in victory when she blushed. If only that asshole knew. Rubbing Dave's face in it would be a great way to get bitch bashed, but it still took everything he had to talk himself out of it. There's so much to talk about. Because, like, it seems like omegaphobia is like homophobia if gay guys fucked your girlfriend. So, like, biphobia. Bitch bashed. Bitch bashed. Like, this is so. Wow. Sorry, I'm just kind of reeling from this. So the other guy, the male lead, is an alpha, but he's kind of gender ambiguous, and intentionally so, because he's got long hair, he's got these bracelets that seem to mirror the cuffs that he bitches wear. I guess bitch isn't as strong of a word in this universe. But he has a physique that is pure alpha, which saves him from getting bitch bashed himself. They end up hooking up in the diner, and the main character comments, Jesus, men did go into heat, right? What the hell was wrong with him? I salute you. You slicked so men could go into heat for the following decade. You are so fucking brave. Anyways, at this point, actually, there's a reveal. He's underage. He's like, I thought he was a college student because like the guy harassing him was, but he's actually like 17, and this male lead is like 25, and I had to like mentally revise my whole understanding of the dynamic in this. Like, anyways, but it's really funny what's going on because again, just like Bitch Bash, they deploy so many concepts. There's one called free nodding where the main guy is like, "Oh my god, I thought alphas couldn't come unless they were nodding," but the other guy instead like kind of put his hand around his dick, preventing it from nodding all the way. Um, okay, and then the main character feels bad for being so parochial that he didn't know that you could do this like pull out method thing. This is a really rich universe. That's all I'm going to say. There's also this thing about birth control. Like the main character doesn't have access to it. It doesn't occur to him. And they talk about how there's no elective abortions. Again, the world is really good. You really get the sense that in like the stage is ripe for this fucking O versus Wade in a couple years. Like, it's hypnotizing. The love interest talks about how actually nodding is considered regressive among liberal types, but he likes it because, of course, blah blah. Our desire is unruly, and it's kind of sexy to be into something regressive, which I think um, explains the long term success of omegaverse. That like, oh, isn't misogyny sexy if you kind of squint a little bit? Like, um, yeah, like and this contrast between the gulf between like one's libido and wokeness doesn't just anticipate things in the future, but also anticipates the main character's own desires. This is kind of conversation they have. Quote, I should have thought of it sooner, Jared said eventually. I'd heard about this, about certain circumstances where a bitch really couldn't come without the nod, but I didn't really believe it was true. I guess the cliche had to come from somewhere. Jensen's stomach clenched. But that's not true for me. That's not me. I never had trouble not jacking off, not with girls. Yeah, it's not. It would only be a problem with me. So yeah, as it turns out, the main character needs to be nodded um, because they're soulmates. Quote, I mean, if this theory out of Berkeley is right. Again, hypnotizing to think about the burgeoning Department of Omega Studies coming out of Berkeley. Fucking fascinating. Anyways, so there's this whole thing where it's like, oh, we're perfectly compatible, so you need to be nodded. Like, it's okay. You need this. And that is going to be kind of this strain, which I want to return to in the next novel. Anyways, also reveal at this point that the love interest is married and to a woman and he doesn't plan to leave her. And this really hurts the main character's feelings. And he reevaluates why he's so hurt, and it's because he was kind of prepared to run off and like settle down with this guy in California and have 2.5 children. But in the end, he decides he'll still go with him to California, but more casually. It's actually at this point the fic ends. It is a forever abandoned work in progress, and the author comments, interestingly enough, that they were planning for it to be poly. Like this, woman the male lead is married to would have been incorporated into the relationship because the main character is bisexual, as we've noted from him like fucking that guy's girlfriend. And so this woman wouldn't be going anywhere in the relationship. But the reaction was so negative, apparently, that they ended up just dropping the fic where it was because they were having writer's block. This is foreshadowing. This woman is, in my view, the first beta. She's not named such, but we're going to see this interesting counterpoint of the possibility of normal sexual life, contrasted against the kind of misogyny sex hell that alphas and omegas find themselves in. And in some ways, that's what this wife, she has a name, I just didn't write it down, so I forgot it, represents within this fic. But what I basically want to say is that there's a lot of ideology here, of course, but it's really, really imaginative. I get why this popularized a lot of stuff. I get why the people wanted to play in this universe. But the one thing I want to say is that what's funny to me is that most of the time when I read stuff that's, older, let's look at the Seinfeld effect, right? It feels derivative because everybody else is copying it. And this one is kind of the star of the shit everybody else copies. But it's very rare to me. Shout out to Rose. Omegaverse. Actually, that one is pretty imaginative too. But I mean in the sense where it's funny that actually things used to be more queer, used to question gender more, and then everybody went, oh, Empreg? Empreg? Okay, we can call it a day with the wokeness. Like, okay. Yeah. Anyways, so we are now going to get into the real novels here. There are 2 of them. Addison Cain's 2016 Born to be Bound, the first book in the Alpha's Claim series, and later we're going to talk about Zoe Ellis's 2018 book. God, what is it fucking called? Give me a sec. Crave to Conquer, the first book in the Myth of Omega series. And the major note I have here is that these kind of have romance novel typical rape and sexual violence. And I'm not going to be really making jokes about that itself, but if you do not enjoy trying to compartmentalize that shit into just romance novel bullshit, don't even try. I think this will be a hard video to watch. So goodbye. I am glad I could educate you about our herstory of Omegaverse. But yeah, it is time to talk about Born to be Bound. So, interestingly, right off the bat, we do see some similarities to the original in that they both have kind of omega pills, but these ones are heat suppressants. There aren't any like real world connections, I think, to what heat suppressants are supposed to be. They could be like birth control, they could be Zoloft, who fucking knows. But the main character is on them, and it's more tenuous what the real world alternative is. I guess maybe it's like morning after pill versus like long-term hormonal. Okay, that's not important. Whatever. Yeah, okay, whatever. Main character is IUD, whatever, fails. um, but the first thing that is immediately notable about Born to be Bound is that Claire, the main character, has a bone to pick with men. She talks about alphas and more violent betas, and she disparages them. Quote, they were thugs who had taken up the banner of the Dome's conqueror, men with the power to do as they pleased, men encouraged to do whatever they pleased. Evil men. There is a lot of man-hating rhetoric in this, which is really compelling, and it's going to be a recurring strain within this. So put a pin in that. And anyways, so this character Claire is looking for a particular alpha, this guy who calls himself the Shepherd. And note, he is massive, the largest alpha she'd ever seen. And he's also, visually striking in a lot of ways, because he has what she calls Darwin markings. Whatever they were, they swirled over sun-darkened skin as if an extension of his wrongness. Animalistic, unnatural, the intricacy of the patterns drawing the eye straight to muscled arms, warning all who looked at the bear was treacherous, not to be trusted. So it's interesting as we see another white man of color. We see another racialized top. But I'm going to send this guy Italian. So just use that as your fan cast in your head. I don't know. I don't fucking care. But again, we're going to see something really interesting happening here. Or we're going to see masculinity compared to animality, that masculinity makes you subhuman in some ways. And in some ways, like, we can see that this kind of seems to be a race thing. This guy does have darker skin, although they are careful to note it's sun darkened. He originally had light skin, never fear. But we're kind of going to also put an idea of this story, a pin in the idea that alphas are less than human because men are less than human. Really fucking depressing to think about. Addison Kane doesn't care. Anyways, she tries to get his attention, but she doesn't get it because she is disguising herself as a beta. She's wearing like clothing that smells like corpses. She has whatever. She's taking these pills. So she tries to take another one, but boom, there's too much alpha scent in the air, and she directly goes into heat. The male lead starts like killing people, so he can be the one to fuck her, I guess. And this is where we start to see this linkage between sex and death, both in terms of the fact that he kills people to have sex with her, that, quote, she wanted, no needed to press her hand between her legs, but the smell of rotting flesh was turning her stomach just as much as the delicious smell of the alpha's den was driving her mad. And again, these are kind of like broad themes, but I'm just going to bring it up where I see it because it's really, really interesting what's happening here. Not in a good way, but just in like I think it's psychologically revealing. And that's what I like to talk about. Anyways, what else has been going on? Claire tells this guy that she's been living a life of celibacy. Claire is a vol cell. The like main guy is like, wow, that's unheard of because like omegas can't fight this urge to mate. And that's why they fight over them. But so he's really impressed by the fact that she's a vol cell. And oh yeah, because again, this is also split POV. Well, it's not really split POV as much as like wandering POV. It's mostly Claire, but occasionally we take detours into other characters. The Zoe Ellis one will be true split POV. I thought I should clarify because Jordan like mentioned that it's interesting about Icy Planet Barbarians. So I'm gonna say explicitly, like, here's what's going on. Also important is we're also kind of seeing again this sort of limp feminism, pop feminism intruding because Claire is really big on her right to choose. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, by the way. I know I talk kind of meanly about like white feminists and shit like that, but I shout out right to choose. But the ways in which like these sort of pithy modern day slogans are incorporated to me is worth thinking about. So let's have some history of the world, by the way. So our lore is that there were some plagues some years ago, and then they have some wars afterwards. And anyways, omegas now are rare and valuable. And Claire has been pretending to be a beta because beta women are like immune from sexual violence, I guess. Don't worry about it. And here again, we kind of see fantasies about what it means to be a woman who is immune from sexual violence. So it's not just a woman who you can't hurt, it's a woman who you can't fuck. So this sort of idea, this unfuckable woman does again kind of like stray into, the unfeminine woman, the woman who is not a woman, the woman who is placed beyond womanhood. A lot of ways, this is kind of the figure of the woman of color intruding in a kind of an interesting way. So we kind of see like, this is a what if white women were women of color, women of color were white? Much to think about. I'm being sort of facetious here. But Claire has been chilling in Omega Monk Mountain with her Volso girl gang, and they are doing so because this guy Shepard has recently taken over the city. They came from the Undercroft. They don't know what the Undercroft is at first, but I will tell you it is a prison. And now the city is in anarchy, and it is open season on Omega, so they are hiding and they are starving because, and that is why Claire came, because she wants to ask this guy for food and protection because this guy made this mess. He should get them out of it. Kind of unclear logic in my opinion. I don't necessarily think that this guy would help her, but it's what she does. And we're going to get to kind of the central thesis of this thing, which is interesting. Claire struggles a lot with her attraction to men, aka alphas. And I'm kind of reminded to Brilliant here, like this one talk they gave in 2019 about the forthcoming book, where it was like talking about this book, much like Brilliant's work, is about what happens when privilege unravels. It's kind of about this archaic, no, it's kind of about our attachment to this dissolving empire, to the things that once made us better than others, better, beginning to fall apart, reveal their fiction, reveal the harm they've caused, and about sort of this result. This book, not Brilliant's work right now, to be clear, is about the sort of erotic tension that happens. It's kind of interesting. So there's an element we're going to notice of recurring racial humiliation, class humiliation, because these are both sort of positions that Claire operates in, that she has relative privilege over this guy. But in a lot of ways, it's also about this sort of heterofatalist idea where you cannot bear men, but you need them, but you are ashamed of it because in some way it doesn't seem progressive, or because it harms you in the end. And so I'm kind of reminded here of the Jensen Jared thing, where they're talking about nodding. The idea that you don't want to nod, but you need to. You don't want an alpha, but you need him. And to me, that is just sort of this interesting sort of, this is about feminism at the end of an empire, from a woman who is kind of unwilling to grapple with her complicity in the latter. Or maybe she's in this book as her way of doing it. I doubt that, but anything is possible in omegaverse. So let's talk about bodies and spaces. Okay, sorry. So one thing we're going to note about him is that there's this point where we talk about his body is marked. It's marked as different because he has these Darwin markings. And we're going to get into what those are later. But more importantly, it's contrasted strongly against her body. Let's talk about her body because there's a lot happening here. So Shepard, the male lead, notes that she has had all of her body hair permanently removed. Quote, recognizing the precaution the Omega had taken to help mask her scent. Okay, I'm going to point out this part that, yes, like body hair, like your armpit or whatever, does kind of trap scent a lot, but why does she still have head on her hair? I need this bitch to be baldified. But this is also combined with the following description. Quote, little pink lips were spread, the swollen glands of his cock lined up where she seemed far too small to accept an organ so large. And he also comments later that the other men would have broken an omega so small. So, I mean, again, we're like back to like talking about, oh, I'm so big and you're so small and delicate. But what's kind of interesting here is when we talk about the small pink lips, when we talk about the hairlessness, unlike Georgie, she doesn't have pubic hair, although Georgie was also almost virtually completely hairless. In a lot of ways, we seem to be talking about sort of this sexually immature body. And I'm not saying this in that, like, I think I'm accusing these people of, like, fetishizing their own youth. I'm talking about this in the context of this heterofatalist frame we've adopted, where it's interesting that the narrator is self-consciously casting herself as somebody who is not ready for sex, who is in some way perpetually adolescent, perpetually immature. And again, we can kind of see this anticipated again by that first one, where we note that that guy was like kind of randomly underage. Where, although I guess he was excited about sex, unlike Claire. But there is this sort of, ambivalence that these women feel that is marked in their very bodies by the ways in which they seem to be viewing themselves as adult children. Part of this is, I think, in some ways trying to cultivate that, like, white woman myth of innocence. But it's also interesting just to think about the sort of what if it was reflected in your body, your vulnerabilities and insecurities and the truth that you knew, and it was legible to other people without you needing to tell them. The implicit demand to be careful with me. So it's a revealing thing. It's interesting. She also described as having a dancer's body. We learn later she was a children's book illustrator. She's stealing dancer valor. Like she why did they use a descriptor? She doesn't dance. She never dances. Pisses me off. Also, she's malnourished. That's what she is. Anyways, more stuff on sex being death. We see her kind of, the more pleasure she feels, the more it kind of becomes like coupled with pain. And we're kind of thinking about this like idea of jouissance, for instance. Like what's beyond the pleasure principle? Omegaverse. We also see the author call orgasms explosions, which is again this kind of like bizarre military term to apply to them, but whatever, a little death, I guess. And Shepard reflects on this, and he kind of says so explicitly. He's mulling over just what to do with what was now his possession, impressed that this little female was plucky enough to dress in corpse's clothing and parade into a pack of alphas just to speak to him. And she would have died if he had not found her scent worth killing for. So death is the means by which she makes it to him. Death is what it's at risk. Death is her destiny. It's kind of dark, okay? And it's the same sort of thing as I See Planet Barbarian, where both of our main characters lose days to being fucked while other women are suffering waiting for them to come back. Now, Claire's actually somewhat distraught about it because she did not make the active choice to be having sex for days the way Georgie did, which again makes Georgie look like even more of a piece of shit. Grats. And again, we have this alpha who is like, okay, I'll help you, Omega/kidnapped women, by bonding them with my boys. And Claire says no, but unlike Vecthal, Shepard is just this chauvinist. The villain's power between them is just completely shifted compared to Icy Planet Barbarian. And they're bonded now, and they have this physical connection. I'm not going to read you too many sex scenes, because a lot of them are violent, first of all, so I do think it's a little uncomfortable to listen to. But this one was just so horrible, I need to share it with you. Naked and so covered in Shepard's semen, it was caked in her hair, she looked shattered. In the hazy, blissful high of their frenzy, he'd fed it to her, rubbed it into her skin, saturated her inside and out with that viscous liquid. If he had not spent so much time running his fingers through her hair, she was certain it would have been a matted mess. What? Like, we're talking fucking liters here. Liters of cum, like. I don't know. Is this supposed to be sexy? Is this supposed to be scary? Disgusting? What? How do you think of this? Like, you're like, yeah, I'm going to tell the reader that this wench's hair is matted with semen. Or, I'm sorry, if it hadn't been combed. I don't have any commentary. I'm just kind of like, anyways, but she has to rub his cum off with like his soap, brush it out of her teeth with his toothbrush. She has no choice not to like smell like him, be covered in him. It's just a lot. Anyways, so now we're going to start talking about betas. So betas are, quote, what Claire had always envied. They had no estrus and could still bear children. Betas got to choose. They mated at will, some even with the same partner for a lifetime, not from some divisive nature that forced a permanent pairing. To make the sting that much greater, unlike omegas, beta females were treated with the same respect as beta males. So it's kind of interesting to see this sort of beta utopianism at play, like the idea that, like, because betas are basically just cis men and women, right? That in some ways they're kind of shown as queer, like I was kind of getting into at the end of that one, talking about the wife of the guy, but also it seems to have this hope for our world that like this is what's possible for cis men and women if we were less alpha, if we were less omega in nature. Beta women, or I guess like cis real world women like beta women could have this level of freedom And it's kind of interesting the degree to which all of the oppression in this universe has shifted away from every other possible like axis, just right to the alpha omegas. Like it's so funny. Like the system cannot handle any other kind of oppression. Um, Omegas, dwindling numbers, they're basically just prize pets for alphas. It's always really unclear to me how if there's dwindling numbers of them, like like alphas and omegas, how come the alphas are still in charge? Like you'd think that like the beta like tyranny would just oppress them too. But don't worry about it, because these authors aren't. Um Claire is very upset at this point. She comments, "That's barbaric. You men are so fucking evil." Because she has just learned that the heat suppressants she thought she was buying were actually fertility drugs. Now this is incredible. Shepard knew it was a generalized collective of males she was referring to, not him specifically, and did not allow more than a hint of anger to come through his voice. It's so funny, like we're seeing this like explanation of like hashtag not all men here. Like actually, like you don't need to feel implicated. Like it's so funny to me, especially because he is kind of a piece of shit. He should feel implicated by criticisms of men, but instead he has like this very like pop feminist understanding of like what it means to like drink male tears or whatever. It's very, very, very funny. What's less funny is that they then fight about whether or not she was raped. Claire believes so, he does not believe so, because apparently she wanted it during her heat, and they don't really get anywhere. Then we kind of return to this sort of heterofatalist streak, like I was mentioning, because, quote, "There was no such thing as true love, of that Claire was certain. Only indoctrination, chemicals, and bastards who kept you locked in rooms." In some ways, I'm kind of reminded of like that like second wave strain of feminism that was really sex negative. I'm thinking of like dworkin here. The idea that like you can't have any pleasurable heterosexual sex. Any sort of like sex had under that like matrix of power is inevitably like you're going to be coerced in some way. Like to me, that's just really interesting how omegaverse does feel stuck in the past in those ways, but also feels beholden to that sex negative viewpoint, even though those wenches hated pornography. It's so funny. Like I feel like they would be fucking like McKinney and Dworkin rolling in their graves, knowing that like they're ostensibly being parroted with the rhetoric within these novels. It's funny. That's all. Much less this kind of regressive pornography. It's really funny. It's like the idea that somebody was reading McKinnon and going like, "Ah, oh, yeah, this could be really sexy." um. Anyways, so Shepard gets mad when she stares at a beta man who's coming to talk to him about something. They fight. He storms off, but the door is unlocked, so she just runs out the door and escapes. And then she meets a beta named Corday. Quote, "Then she saw him, and he might have just been the most beautiful thing her eyes had ever beheld." And this is interesting. We're talking about masculinity being suspect. Because the beta, who is not as masculine as the shepherd, is being set up as this sort of paragon of desirability. In a lot of ways, it's because masculinity feels like a racialized construct. But I guess I should call them the excesses of masculinity, all right? But we're going to get into this later. Turns out he's an enforcer, which is like a cop, but actually most of the cops were supposed to be dead. It just he survived because he didn't get murdered by like the cop plague that the Shepherd unleashed. Shout out Shepherd. And this is where we learn something interesting. We learn they have alpha females in this world because he makes kind of a joke about like having to fight off alpha females to buy these eggs or whatever. So yes, alpha females do exist. So how come Claire keeps on talking about hating all alphas? And alphas being men, and men being evil, and violent beta males, and shit like that. When alpha females exist, like, are they similarly chauvinistic? Like, do male omegas exist? It came out of complete left field. I thought alphas were men, but no, they're not. Because of the bond, she can kind of feel Shepard under her skin, and she can feel him mad, and she knows that he can feel her terror back. It's kind of this funny bit where, like, staring in the mirror, she found queer green eyes in the reflection, and wished she understood why the face looking back at her was filled with regret. She said the Q word. Anyways, they talk about their parents a little bit, and Claire makes a joke about her dad was really funny. So alpha, though. They both stickered, knowing exactly what that meant. Alpha parents were fanatic about their children, over-involved, bragging constantly, generally an embarrassing pain in the ass. What about your mom? an uptight omega with no sense of humor. She left when I was 12. Um, I, I, thinking about trying to offer coherent commentary on like the view of gender this sets up is giving me a headache, so I'm not going to. I'm gonna let you do that while I continue reading. So Claire has so many nightmares because of her connection to Shepard that Corday eventually gives her a pill that'll help her sleep. She's scared of what if it works, what if it works too well, what if she overdoses like her mom did, and so she hides it. And she imagines that Corday snores is Shepard's breath because Shepard as an alpha can purr, and the purring is really comforting. So she's frustrated that his touch, his purr, his comfort, it would bring her peace. So again, I can think of Berlant's cruel optimism here. Sort of the idea that the things we decide to vest our happiness in are actually the things that are holding us back. Like it's really funny. I think Berlant was writing about omegas or something. So we learn that Shepard's genetic markers via Corday are not on record. So even though he escaped from the Undercroft ostensibly, he was not imprisoned there. So was he falsely imprisoned? And we also learn that the plague he unleashed was created by the government and he hid. And so Claire sneaks out to meet with the other Omegas, and she comments that like he's not going to give her food, but he just wants to disclose the location. That way everyone could be taken and give it to the followers. And this woman's like, is that what we want? And Claire is like, no, because you'd be imprisoned and you'd be offered to a stranger and he, bond to a man of his choosing. Like, and then it's like, well, would he feed us? And then Claire's like, is that all you want? And you know, these women, unlike in Icy Planet Barbarians, are pissed that she's been eating and having sex and shit. But they are kind of still kind of portrayed as unreasonable. So, like, you win some, you lose some. She returns to Corday, and they talk about, Corday has brought the senator because it turns out that the Shepards are placing wanted posters everywhere for her. So they learn that actually his prison tattoos, the dworkin tattoos, are not made from ink. They're a parasite. Brows tight, Claire. You purposely infect conflicts. So they also have racialized tops with parasites in them. I am saying it now. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I think Addison Kane should have sued Ruby Dixon instead of Zoe Ellis. There are a lot of connections to Icy Planet Barbarians here. Like, guy who's only read Icy Planet Barbarians. Getting a lot of Icy Planet Barbarians vibes from this. Yeah. But anyways, I'm reeling up the series of events that follow, because what happens is Claire jacks off in the shower. She didn't intend to, but she does. And then Corday takes a shower after her, and then he spills his pheromones in there, and he jacks off too. Meanwhile, she puts the sleeping pill that he gave her in the past, that he into his food and sneaks off. And she goes to her omegas, because she's possessed with them. It's like she's the alpha via this thing. Anyways, so they just kind of say it out loud. Claire stood up straight. I'm only offering options. The group must decide for itself if they want instant slavery or difficult freedom. And it's kind of awkward. You know what? So, you know what? I'll hold on for a sec to like talk about all that. And anyways, so the Omegas knock her out and betray her, and because they don't trust the senator's plan and would rather be muted to the real rulers of the city, because the senator was like going to give her aid, but they just didn't trust it because he did kind of lose the whole city. And then Claire and Shepard have sex. He like starts like eating her out because he is tasting her cunt for other men. Why are you eating your girl's pussy? You want to lick other men? Like, you construct intricate rituals. Okay, I should stop by. Okay. Anyways, so there's this bit where she's fighting with him, and she's going, look, it's your fault. Quote, you're a tyrant. You expect things I don't understand. I hardly know a thing about you. You don't listen. Keep me locked underground. How would you like to live in prison? He is literally an escaped convict. Like, prison isn't like a metaphor. Like, there is an actual prison in this world that he has been in and that she has not. Like, I'm not saying that makes his behavior right, but it's really interesting. And he'll kind of remark on it later, but then all the Omegas will keep on doing it. So it's kind of odd. And so he lets her bite him back, and he's kind of indulging her. And quote, you are wayward and foolishly noble. I find it's not disappointing. And again, we're kind of seeing like, oh, the dignity of the crumbling empire or whatever. He comments to her, "You think you know what prison is, little one? You do not. In prison, one is surrounded by the worst possible breed of men. If I wanted food or water, I had to kill for it. Shelter, supply, everything was hard earned." Anyways, so he's basically saying that she's not allowed to complain about her treatment or her soul at his hands because she lives in comparative safety and comfort compared to her. That we learned that he was actually born in prison because she thinks this isn't possible because women aren't sent to the undercroft because women don't like they just go somewhere else if they're going to be imprisoned. So this is all like, huh? There's a lot going on here with this prison thing that this author frankly doesn't have the chops for. It's really bizarre. Um, and they do kind of the same poor meow meow thing that Icy Planet Barbarians does, or like Claire is pleading for the lives of the Omegas who betrayed her, and she's like, "Please don't kill them. Lillian and the others were starving, afraid, and desperate." And he's like, "So were you." His narrow eyes flared. "More afraid than they were, and you were and are still trying to be their champion." Um, I mean, she did get fed though, and they didn't. Like they were objectively more starving than she was, because even ignoring her capture by Shepard, she still was living with Corday, who was treating her very nicely and buying her new clothing and feeding her and trying to like help her protect her, which none of those Omegas had. So I do want to comment at this point that like I'm not saying they were right to betray her, but it's this sort of thing where they try to act like she's the most oppressed of all compared to the other women who have less staunch moral fiber, and it's like she wasn't. Um, Anyways, let's talk more about like we see another reiteration of the thing I was talking about, like the sort of the fantasy of being sexually immature, where he like hushes her as if comforting a child. So this idea that like I don't know, whatever. Let's keep going. Anyways, Corday's boss is an alpha female. He doesn't like her. They're hunting. Well, he didn't used to like her. Now she's fine. They're hunting on the source of the bad suppressants, and it's actually a meth lab full of trafficked Omega women. Okay, whatever. I'm not going to dwell on that. Shepard's been injecting her with fertility drugs, by the way, and he thinks that being a mother will make her happy, and she just calls him like omegaphobic, and he's like, "Well, you're hormonal," and she's like, "Well, you've been giving me hormones." Like they're force fed a cis woman, like the levels we are on. Then after like Corday's like meth lab bust or whatever, he buries this Omega woman there, and here we see our first explicit woman of color. The woman who died, her name was Kim Pham. Representation. Okay, it's horrible. Anyways, it's funny because Claire actually compares being an Omega to skin color or class background, even though there's only like one kind of oppression here. So it kind of implies that like they used to have racism or something, but they don't anymore. And also like the implication that Shepard is oppressing her because she's rich, whatever. All right, I'm kind of kidding here, but I am thinking about this. Is what I was thinking about getting into earlier. Um, the other day, I said the other day, last night, I was reading Fandom Now in Color because one of my mutuals on Twitter, Synonym Sugar, had been posting about it. So I was like, okay, whatever, I'll just read it really fast. And they have actually a piece in there that talks about like slave fantasies within omegaverse, which feels startlingly like relevant to the matter at hand. And I kind of saved like this quote from it where it's talking about how like these stories quote vacate responsibility from whiteness. If white people are both masters and slaves in this universe, then slavery becomes unrelated to race, and white readers do not have to confront any of their own discomfort in reading about the actual workings of slavery. So it's interesting that because whiteness is everywhere, it has the fantasy that it is nowhere. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so awkward to read about all of the shit that like I keep on commenting the author doesn't have the chops for because of the numbing whiteness. Like what if like slaves were white? What if we were like racist towards white men? What if I mean, it's all just these things, and it's on some level it's due to the romance novels I've been choosing, but it's kind of fascinating from like this ethnographic perspective. Also, what I want to comment here, this was incredibly. So this like he is roaring while he's fucking her. I don't think. Speaking of things we don't put enough thought into, I don't think anybody put enough thought into what roaring sounded like. I found this clip of Lions roaring compilation. I'm gonna play it for you. those noises? Horrible. Horrible. Anyways, she's pregnant now. And yeah, he still is loving to cover her in his cum, like he's rubbing it in. And at this point, she doesn't even care anymore. Quote, dressing, oblivious, she lacked an urge to wash his semen away. Wait, I completely misread all the tones on that. Whatever. The point is that she doesn't realize that she's just like fine with being covered with all his rubbed in semen now, which, okay, I don't like want to kink shame people, but like, she mentioned she's been courted before, and he's like, betas? And she's like, well, betas respect my boundaries. Alphas are dangerous to take without asking. And it's interesting to look at the way that they talk about alphas and betas. Like, it could just be like the red pill, like, kind of like manosphere conception of alphas and betas to talk about like, oh, alpha males do this and beta males do this, which I think is just funny. Again, we kind of see our circles or Venn diagram. Anyway, so Corday finds her old home. He digs through her stuff, and he's just like, Claire has to be fine. She has to be different than the other Omegas. She has to be. And it's interesting that he has this fantasy about her not being a typical Omega, which in some ways is true. I mean, it's kind of like this interesting, again, like ideological choice. And then an alpha woman shows up. If you've been like, wow, the alpha women just keep on getting mentioned, that is called foreshadowing. I added foreshadowing into my summary. So this woman claims to be Shepard's beloved, and she keeps on getting called exotic, and she also seems wealthy. And they have this bizarrely homoerotic scene. Like, it starts with the alpha slapping Claire, and then she's like, you're drenched in him. Lie on the bed and spread your legs so I may see. And Claire's like, I don't know who the fuck you are. Back off. And then this woman kind of like makes this tutting noise. And she's like, you can obey or I will have Shepard force you. And Claire's like, so get him to force me. I don't spread just because an alpha bitch commands it. They have more sexual tension than Shepard and Claire have had. Before she might escape, an unyielding hand circled Claire's throat. She was forced back until her knees bent and the Omega's back hit the mattress. And then we kind of have another like eating my girl's pussy so I can taste other men moment where she kind of like, you know, like starts feeling around inside Claire. And then she tastes it. She's like, you're pregnant. How interesting. Because she can taste that shit, I guess. Did she eat a lot of the... Anyways, so this woman's name is Svana, and she actually proposes a threesome with Shepard, and it turns out they've actually shared heated omegas before, and this really upsets Claire. Like, this is his biphobic Claire moment. And she becomes so depressed that she like loses Shepard's scent. She's just lying down depressedly. Again, like I'm gonna note here that again more Omegas comparing how they're being treated to prison. Shepard doesn't refute them, so I guess we can just assume that this is trying to say something about prison society. Maybe I should have been referencing Foucault this whole time. Final quote. Snow that thick was a sign the dome had been damaged, the Arctic creeping in. The engineers responsible for colonial safety had failed. They say colonial, so like this is a colony. So there's an empire somewhere. This novel is about imperial decay. It's crazy. Anyways, so she throws herself out the window to escape, and that is the end of book one. And we will never know what happens next because I'm not reading the whole series for this video because it's already way too long. But I actually do kind of know because back in 2019, when the deposition first dropped, when Keynes first started like suing people, I did read it in its entirety, and apparently. Like, it says the ending of the Alpha's claim is akin to the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, where the lovers commit suicide. Okay, cool. Anyways, so there's no happy ending for Shepard and Claire. There's just a lot of suffering and then death. Which, I mean, yeah, makes sense for the sort of, like, horribly pessimistic. Anyways, after that horrible long video, it's time to talk about Crave to Conquer by Zoe Ellis, book one in the Myth of Omega series. I'm going to try to make this one shorter and just kind of speed through it with a lot more summary because this is insane. So help, right off the bat in the summary, quote, the Alpha Emperor. He's known as a ruthless barbarian by many. They're not wrong. His savagery has made him emperor, and now it will secure his mate. Not that I'm expecting something like super progressive, but I did think that like we weren't allowed to say like barbarian and savage anymore. Like as like it's I do feel I thought that was pretty like universally decided, but I guess romance operates on different timelines. Anyways, so the plot of this book is that Omegas are going missing, so he teams up with this beta historian named Kaylin, but she's actually an Omega in disguise and also a spy, and he wants to fuck her even though she's defiant and a beta, blah 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 blah. And quote, for fans of dominant alpha anti-heroes, sassy Omega heroines, epic fantasy worlds, and captive romances. Are there any other kinds of Omegaverse novels? Who knows? Anyways, our male lead's name is Drogo. It could be Draco, but I'm gonna go Drogo. And he is literally the leader of this barbarian horde, which has taken over the Eastern lands. It is headed for the west. Anyways, so there's this very preoccupation with masculinity. The idea that because there aren't any omegas, the alphas aren't leading, quote, full and complete lives. We see that the ruthlessness is the terrain of alphas, but also they have to be intelligent too because alphas are capable of both. And they don't want to fall to the stereotypes pressed on them. So there obviously are stereotypes that oppress alphas in some way. And there are spies, and Draco is trying to root them out. The spies have something called the talent, which is just kind of magical power, and he has a beta bestie named Torin, and Draco disparages him for being a beta, like repeatedly, but he's his right-hand man anyway. And then he meets our female lead, and her name is Kaylin, and quote, on the small side for a beta, she stood straight and confident, suggesting she had experience with statesmen or royals. Draco found himself kind of irritated. Although he appreciated her professionalism, it was rare that someone of her size remained unfazed by his. He was the largest alpha known in the Eastern lands, so again, the biggest guy anyone has ever seen with this little girl. Even her features get called petite. I don't know what it means to have petite features, but she has them. And we learn that for the past 111 years, omegas have been disappearing. First, the adult omegas disappear, and then elsewhere, other cities start reporting the same. They stop being sighted, and then female children start disappearing. Young children before their dynamic was revealed at the age of 12, and currently female children are disappearing soon after birth, and it's assumed that all the missing girls are omegas. And the problem is that because there aren't that many omegas, less alphas and omegas are being born. Because most alphas are now born to beta families. There's something, I guess, genetically speaking about gender here. I'm not going to dwell, but basically the idea is that betas are more likely to have beta children, and the king hates that. He wants his omega, and he wants his alphas to remain strong. And he wants to have a generation of alphas being born. Let's talk some more about masculinity briefly. Quote, massive, bulky, and animalistic, he was so alpha, he was almost a ridiculous stereotype. His wild black hair, the way he prowled the room, his arrogance and demands, all typical of an alpha, with no limit to his ego. Okay. And what's interesting is that this main character is also really sexually interested in betas. At one point in the past, she actually had considered accepting a mission to seduce his Torin, the right-hand beta man. And this is something that the male lead perceives as a threat because beta women end up with beta men, so it seems like beta men are, for the first time ever, a threat to his masculinity. And other things. Alphas need omegas to be complete. Other things. He calls her kitten. He calls her kitten. He's like, do not mock things you have no understanding of, kitten. And it's like, she is your employee. And like, she lets him get away with it for a while before they have a fight about it. But he calls her kitten like 40 times. It's crazy. By the way, there was still no sex. Fascinating. And then, so they're looking for records of the number of omegas. Again, like, she knows what's happened to them, but he doesn't know, and we don't know at this point. Then he gets jealous at her for being too friendly with another beta. Oh no, of course you're gonna date within the race or whatever. And then we kind of see whatever. So Drogo laughs when she tries to quit. He's like, do you think you're still in for more? He planted his wide hands on either side of her head and leaned down. Let me like POV this. Let me fix my face for POVs. Do you think you're still in for more? Or Neka? Or Grents? Do you think you're even in Ashens? You're in the Lox Empire, kitten. And your employment doesn't end until I fucking end it. Which, like, okay? Alright? Like, kitten, and you can't quit double whammy? It's just so much. Anyways, so the betas who work in this library or whatever know something that he doesn't, and that's what they were talking about with Kaylin, that the omegas are dying, or rather, they were dying and in large numbers before they started disappearing. Anyways, but now she smiles. Again, we see some more mentions of her petite features and how her smile enhances her petite features. And how the hell can your features be petite? Like, they're short? Like, okay, whatever. And then he talks to a king of a country within the Western lands. His name is Malaron, and they're trying to work out some trade deal shit. And Malaron's like, okay, he's like, I just thought it was kind of interesting. They talk about what goods were prohibited in the past, and toxicants like mutated wine, fine spirits, tobacco enhancers, recreational and medicinal subjects, including hallucinogens and haze recruit. And Draco's like, you can just declare them, it's fine. And then voluntary manual and sexual labor workers of any age, fine. Involuntary manual and sexual laborers of any age, only criminals. Again, weird shit about criminals in both these books. So Malaron tries to tempt him into trading warriors for the talent, but Draco rejects him. He says that his warriors are with him by choice and that he doesn't want to strengthen Malaron in his country. But Malaron was like, oh, come on, man, the talent can be used to find your true mate. Come on, but Draco stays strong. Anyways, we learned at the beta that she was too close to the library was actually an Omega, because there were male Omegas. The first one had female alphas and so does male omegas, so there's a little bit of like a diversity win. They're a dynamic variant. They're very rare and they're typically killed at birth. Oh my god. Anyways, there's no details about their anatomy or whether they're capable of pregnancy or whatever. Actually, we later learn that they have self-lubricating acids, but that's about it. Anyways, she's trying to get out because the Emperor is too obsessed with her. She was just trying to get some Omega research and then get out. But the problem is because the Emperor is obsessed with her, it's hard for her to leave. I just want to know that no current living alpha has ever had sex with an Omega, which I find incredibly funny. Anyways, so he tries to get her to pledge loyalty. He gives her the special dress, and she resists, and he threatens the little sister of the woman that she's pretending to be, and then she gives in. And then it's the night of the ceremony, and boom, he has up like these like charm things, and she enters heat. Well, they call it haze. And he's like, hey, well, I have questions, but we're having sex now. And she actually uses her magic powers to create a barrier because she doesn't want to have sex with him. This is the first time anyone has ever said no to sex in Omegaverse, by the way. In either yesterday's, last video's book, the fic, or the one before this. So this is actually kind of a girl boss moment. She's like, haha, you can't touch me. Also, she tries to teleport away but fails, so she's just in proper haze in this room, trapping him on one side and her on the other. Also, her Omega vision gives her the power to see who has the most, like, potential for breeding. I guess who has the most potent sperm, and, like, it's our male lead who has the most powerful glow sperm, whatever. And in such a few hours, she starts jacking off, and he gets so mad. Because, like, but the thing is that her haze-addled brain doesn't understand why he's not fucking her, or two, that she's the one who prevented him from doing so. But it's been days at this point. He's just staring at her and getting pissed off that they can't fuck. And the beta friend, like Torin, is like, bro, can we please start trying to break down the barrier because we don't know whether the barrier will end first or her haze. And then they fight about whether or not she's a spy, and if she's a spy, who she's working for. And there's kind of this funny bit where he's jacking off right in front of the barrier, and she's like licking the barrier, and they're both really pissed off they can't fuck. It's really funny deferment of the sex. Like, this is the only book that's ever tried to establish any sort of sexual tension at all, because in every other book, anytime any character wants to fuck, they just immediately have sex. But this is the one time in which we see characters having desire for each other that is not immediately fulfilled. So this is kind of a landmark watershed moment for me in my romance novel reading. Anyways, eventually the barrier breaks because she's like passed out, and then he starts fucking her. And by the way, he does it not with betas, by the way, just like Jared from the fic. Anyways, yeah, they do not fuck until chapter 7, and this is a slow burn romance compared to everything else. Like, that's a fucking eternity in these romance novel years that they waited. Let's talk about Omega bisexuality. So, at the compound, Omegas sometimes tear it up to satisfy each other with their tongues and fingers and phallic contraptions, but Kaylin had never been interested in that. The idea of having to look another Omega in the eye afterward was too mortifying. So first of all, Kaylin is Omega biphobic. Secondly, I guess Omega men just have assholes, not dicks, I guess. I'm not really thinking about this because we know that they have anal sex, but we don't know that. Yeah, I'm not going to dwell on that. The other thing I think is interesting about this is that it's portrayed purely as a convenience thing. It's like very like by Omega with an alpha boyfriend kind of thing, where it's like a something you do before you settle down into happy heterosexuality, because this book has happy heterosexuality in it, I guess. They similarly to Shepard and Claire have a fight about whether or not she was raped or whether she could meaningfully consent during heat. He questions her, he fucks her painfully. There's a lot of descriptions of vaginal tearing actually in this chapter, and I was kind of unsure whether it was supposed to be titillating or not. It mostly just seemed kind of like painful. Um, he okay, here's a quote from which is kind of like ideology in terms of talking about like the same sort of things as the past book in terms of like Jacques, is quote, he still touched and caressed her to an unavoidable arousal and fucked her knowing she would fuck him back. Okay, actually wait, kind of interesting to the idea that they feel the need to specify that the fucky is also an active position, which like, okay, yeah. Anyways, her orgasms, although powerful and consuming, became something to fear, something that also brought on powerful and consuming pain. Yeah, we're talking about Jacques here. That's crazy. Um, I think Irigaray would have a lot to say about it. Sorry. Um, anyways, so she reveals that the reason. Okay, she keeps on accusing him of like in other alphas of not caring for omegas, and Draco is getting really mad about this. He thinks that all alphas cherish the omegas because of course they would. We also get an interesting tidbit here because he threatens to fuck her in the ass, and she gets really scared because, quote, omega females were not made for penetration in their asses like omega males. So I'm like, do omega males have any genitalia at all? Um, Many of the deaths reported sodomization as a starting point for unrecoverable internal trauma and infection her kind. This literally explains so much about the way people write anal and slash fandom. Like, it's just like Eyes Pull, where it's like, will you die instantly if you get fucked in the ass? And this book is like, yes. Anyways, so Caitlin finally reveals why the Omegas left. It was mainly due to underage sexual abuse and abuse in general, as well as at the hands of alphas, and no one is surprised by this. Well, I mean, Draco is, but like the reader, you, me, we're not. Um, again, the heterofatalism isn't quite as palpable as in the first one, but again, when it is, it's a lot more explicit. Quote, she now had a first-hand understanding of why the mothers had removed themselves and all other omegas from the main population. Alphas were sick fucking bastards, and omegas were attracted to them nonetheless. Like, it's so funny. We see this attempt at like lesbian separatism, and we even down to the fucking political lesbianism, where it's like, okay, I guess we'll try to have sex on our heats, but none of us will enjoy it. Like, oh, this is so funny. Like, it's funny that they're like, what if we tried to eroticize the sex wars? Anyways, this again details like once Kaylin is penetrated again for the first time in a while, she realizes she's always craved it. And then he tries to like bait out whether or not like she's a virgin or not. And then a quote, there have been many, many men before you, and there will be many men after you. I will fuck every single alpha and beta I find, and I'll love it, Emperor. You and your cock will be a distant memory, and I'll never give you another thought because you are not my alpha. Sorry, I just thought that was like really funny. Anyway, so he gets pissed off and almost strangles her to death. And then he talks about torturing her, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna break her, and I have to do my knot. Because, quote, that was a trick to breaking a prisoner, enforcing pain on the one thing that truly made them who and what they were. Omegas were the only dynamic that could truly be knotted, and that was where Kaelin had to suffer. First of all, torture, like, it's very explicit about the fact that he's trying to torture her, which, okay, romance novels don't seem to be okay. This is not enemies to lovers. This is like enemies to political prisoners, to committing war crimes against your prisoners of war, to lovers. There's a lot of stuff in between. The other thing is that it's funny that we see Omega being a gender constituted by the ability to be knotted. Um, I'm reminded here of Freud, the idea that the phallus is constituted through castration. I'm sorry, I need to stop fucking around and just continue on because this is so long. Anyways, he talks to the keeper, and the keeper, who's I think the male Omega one, is like, dude, you can't keep an Omega prisoner. You're in your relationship forever. And this is like blowing Draco's mind. He's like, oh my god, by torturing this girl, I'm ruining our happy relationship. And it's like, okay. Anyways, in this one, Alpha's also purr, and it's the one comforting thing they can do. And Omegas just start like fucking sobbing and shaking, thinking about Alpha purrs. So this completely revolutionizes his mind. The idea that like maybe he shouldn't be torturing her if he wants her to love him. So they have sex and it's actually pleasurable this time. So she reveals in response that she was a virgin, and then she worries about pregnancy. And then Draco is like, "Oh, I guess I realized I'm not interested in her submission." And it's this funny pretense of equality where they pretend like, "Oh, I'm not interested in submissive women," while he is keeping her prisoner. You are interested in submission. Like, you're not interested in equality in any way, shape, or form. You're perhaps interested in, like, kind of like her pretending to struggle or, like, dishonest about her desire or whatever. But this is what's fascinating to me is that, like, a lot of these books try to pretend they're a lot more egalitarian than they are. It's really funny. It's like, is this your idea of, like, sexual freedom? Um, Oh, and by the way, they've been fucking for months this whole time, and everybody knows that his Omega hates him, including Malaron. And he offers to cast a spell so that Draco will know everything about her. He just needs to give away a bunch of military secrets. And he's kind of pissed off about this, but he agrees. Oh, here's like a beta that's like destroyed moment where Torin is like, "Why didn't you summon a beta female to spend the night with you?" Because Draco's sexually frustrated. Draco looked at Torin and turning to face him before answering, "There are many things we have shared and understood between us in our friendship, Torin, but I cannot make you understand how much more superior my Omega is to me than a beta female. It cannot compare. She's exquisite. I'd rather have nothing than a poor imitation." Torin's face slackened in shock, and for a moment he seemed speechless. He studied Draco. "We don't have to do this today." It's so funny. The interactions between them are really funny, and I'm like, what is going on between these men? Like, it's imagine like you ask your friend like, why do you have sex? And he says all that, and you're just like, okay, anyway. But anyways, it's the spell that Malaron gives him in return for all his military secrets actually just refers Kalen's magic to her, and she just fucking books it. She makes it back to her Omega Monk Mountain, I'm sorry, the compound, and the mothers there tell her that they'll remove her memory of them and return her to the king because they think she'll be safer that way because he is her true mate. That's why all of like the shit worked on her, and she ended up becoming like going into haze. And she's really defensive about that because she keeps on saying, "I had a terrible time there. It wasn't pleasurable. He tortured me." All the stuff you're saying that was signs of pleasure or whatever. But all of these mothers are like gaslighting her into being like, "No, it was a true mate, blah, 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 blah." And again, we see this whole thing that like they're telling her she has to be straight. And she's like, "What if I don't, but I don't want to." And they're like, "But you are straight." It's really funny. And then she ends up going, "Fine, I'll go back." And she gets kidnapped by Malaron soldiers. And that is the end of the book. All right, I'm going to say something at this point. If you're like, wow, these two novels don't really seem similar at all. Yeah, like this, like one is a mystery, like enemies to lovers, thriller type of shit, like, and then the other one's just straight up erotic horror. It kind of reminds me of that one really long fan fiction that I life blog a lot. That I'm not going to name the title of this video, but if you know, you know. And it's really funny to me, like I said earlier, the Icy Planet Barbarians is the comparison I kept on making because Ms. King, you should have sued Ruby Dixon, not legal advice. So they're not similar at all. So why did Kane sue Alice? And actually, I can give you the answer because from reading the deposition. What's really funny is that we know from her closed Facebook group, Verse Harem Readers, that Kane was really defensive of the fact she considers herself to have invented straight omegaverse. This is something a lot of people get wrong. They're like, "Oh, don't you realize that gay people invented omegaverse?" No. According to Kane, quote, "I was the first for M/F. I loved reading omegaverse fanfiction, but got so frustrated that it never included women. So I made my own meta, parenthetically, rules of the universe, for MF Omegaverse and wrote my own." So that's what she believes is hers, the idea of het Omegaverse, because she does know her hashtag herstory and was there when the sacred texts were written or whatever. But she just decided to put women into it. So that's one of the reasons why she's just very defensive of het Omegaverse. And I guess she just got pissed off because there aren't that many similarities on the macro level. On the micro level, we also see within that Facebook group a lot of like examples of common threads. For instance, "You have no choice but to fuck me. Either I will fuck you or I will leave you to my men and they will all rape you together." I would not brag about copywriting that. Another example of a similarity was that they purr and it's soothing. Third similarity, you get cool air on your flushed skin. Fourth similarity, that this man is supposed to be fucking me in heat. That's his job. Why isn't he fucking me? Five, um, you kind of like really put your cock in and then you're not gross. Six, when like the knot like loosens and all like the cum starts coming out and you're like, no. And then like the guy kind of like scoops it and like puts it in your mouth. Okay. 7, like you get bitten and you're like, ooh. 8, days worth of semen being matted in your hair. I will say that maybe that part was copied because it is so singularly repulsive to me, and yet these people both did it. I'm thinking that maybe Ellis was inspired there. I will concede that because I don't know that you could have come up with that on your own. Well, maybe it's really common. I'm actually revealing that I'm like super normal right now or whatever, and I don't know anything. Okay. 9, oh, you're so malnourished and yet sexual for it. Yeah, those are the alleged similarities. I mean, I wouldn't sue over that. But then again, maybe that's why I don't have the romance novel grind set. I'm just stuck making YouTube videos. That's the end of this. Bye bye.